I'm Allison, 32 years old and barely making rent as a graphic designer in Boston. In my family of prestigious doctors and high-powered lawyers, I've always been the odd one out with my sketchbooks and paint-stained jeans. Last month, during what my father called a family financial planning meeting, my parents looked me straight in the eyes and said I would inherit absolutely nothing. "You made your bed," Mom said coldly. Then yesterday, my grandmother's lawyer called with news that changed everything. If you're watching this from somewhere cozy, give this video a like, subscribe to hear more stories of family betrayal and unexpected redemption, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Growing up in Brookline, one of Boston's most affluent suburbs, meant living in the shadow of expectations. Our Tudor-style home with its manicured lawn and imposing facade perfectly mirrored my parents' polished exterior and rigid standards. My father, Thomas, was a renowned neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, whose patients included celebrities and foreign dignitaries. My mother, Catherine, graduated top of her class from Harvard Law and became a feared corporate attorney whose name made junior associates tremble. Success wasn't just encouraged in our household, it was the baseline expectation. My siblings embraced the family legacy without hesitation. Natalie, for years my senior, was the golden child who followed our father into medicine, specializing in cardiology with a research focus that regularly got her published in medical journals. Brian, just 2 years older than me, walked in our mother's footsteps, attending her alma mater and securing a position at her former firm. Family portraits showed us coordinated in tasteful outfits, smiling like the perfect American family, but the dynamics beneath were far more complicated. "Allison, drawing is a lovely hobby, but it's time to think about a real career," my mother would say, barely glancing at the detailed illustrations I'd spent hours creating. This was a common refrain at our formal Sunday dinners, where achievements were announced and scrutinized like corporate quarterly reports. "Your art teacher says you have talent?" "That's nice, sweetheart, but talent doesn't pay medical school tuition," my father would add with a dismissive chuckle that made my stomach knot. Meanwhile, Natalie's perfect MCT scores or Brian's internship offers were celebrated with expensive bottles of champagne. Only grandmother Evelyn saw something different in me. "You have the Montgomery fire," she'd whisper when we had our special afternoons together, referencing her maiden name with a conspiratorial wink. Not everyone is meant to follow the same path. Grandma Evelyn was something of a family anomaly herself. Born to old Boston money, she had scandalized her parents by marrying my grandfather, Harold, a talented architect with no family connections or inherited wealth. "They thought I was throwing my life away," she told me once while we looked through her old photographs. "But I recognized something special in him that transcended bank accounts and social registers." In her sunlit sitting room, away from my parents' critical eyes, Grandma taught me about composition and color theory. She kept a collection of art books that she'd secretly lend me, complete with encouraging notes tucked between pages. "Your great-grandmother was a painter too," she revealed once, though when I asked more questions, she became uncharacteristically evasive. When it came time for college applications, my parents had already mapped out my future, pre-med at Tufts, followed by medical school. The brochures appeared mysteriously on my desk, and dinner conversations increasingly centered around alumni connections my father could leverage. The day I received my acceptance letter to Rhode Island School of Design was both the proudest and most terrifying of my young life. I still remember the heavy silence that fell over the kitchen when I finally gathered the courage to make my announcement. "This is disappointing, Allison," my father said after what felt like hours. "We won't support this detour." His words were measured, clinical, as if diagnosing a patient with an unfortunate but preventable condition. "Art school is for people who don't have your advantages," my mother added. "If this is your choice, you'll need to figure out how to pay for it yourself." They kept their word. While my siblings enjoyed fully funded educations, I cobbled together student loans, part-time jobs, and a modest scholarship. Each semester was a financial tightrope walk, but the freedom to pursue my passion made the struggle worthwhile. During those 4 years, My visits home became increasingly infrequent and uncomfortable, marked by pointed questions about job prospects and thinly veiled suggestions about transferring to a real university. By graduation, the distance between us had grown from a crack to a chasm. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in Somerville, just outside Boston proper, and built a freelance graphic design business from scratch. My apartment might have been small, with pipes that clinked and neighbors who argued loudly, but it was mine, filled with colors, textures, and the freedom to create. For 5 years, I existed on the periphery of family events, appearing for major holidays and the occasional birthday celebration, enduring the predictable interrogations about my situation before retreating back to my authentic life. My portfolio grew with projects for local businesses, bands, and small publications, while my bank account remained stubbornly modest. Then, 3 weeks ago, a formal email from my father arrived in my inbox. Family financial planning meeting. Attendance mandatory. Sunday, 3 p.m. The request itself was unusual enough to set off alarm bells, but the timing aligned with my parents' 65th birthdays, so I assumed it related to their retirement planning. Despite the knot of dread in my stomach, I RSVP'd with a simple, "I'll be there." Some sense of familial duty, or perhaps morbid curiosity, propelled me to accept the invitation that would lead to one of the most painful experiences of my adult life. The familiar drive to my childhood home felt like traveling backward in time. As I navigated the tree-lined streets of Brookline in my used Honda Civic, memories surfaced with each landmark. The park where I'd sketch for hours, the ice cream shop where Grandma Evelyn would take me after school, the community center where I'd taken my first art classes. Pulling into the circular driveway behind Natalie's Mercedes and Brian's Audi, I felt the familiar pang of being the family misfit. The house looked exactly as it always had, imposing, immaculate, and coldly perfect. A fresh coat of taupe paint, new spring flowers in precisely arranged beds, windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. My mother answered the door in a crisp navy dress, pearls at her throat, greeting me with an air kiss that smelled of expensive perfume. "You're almost late," she said, glancing pointedly at her watch, though I was 7 minutes early. "Everyone's waiting in your father's study." Following her through the marble foyer, past the formal living room that no one actually lived in, I steeled myself for what was to come. Family meetings in my father's study had never boded well, from the time he'd announced we couldn't get a dog because it would disturb his concentration, to the Cold War that erupted when I declared my college plans. The study was a testament to my father's accomplishments. Medical degrees and awards lined the walls, leather-bound books filled custom shelves, and a massive mahogany desk dominated the space like a throne. My father sat behind it, silver hair perfectly coiffed, while Natalie and Brian occupied the leather armchairs opposite. I was left with a straight-backed wooden chair clearly brought in from the dining room, positioned slightly apart from the others. "Now that we're all here," my father began without preamble, "we can discuss the purpose of this gathering." He shuffled papers with the same precision he probably used in the operating room. "Your mother and I are updating our estate planning, and we wanted to be transparent about our decisions while we're still in excellent health." What followed was essentially a status report on my siblings' accomplishments. Natalie, now 36, had just received a substantial grant for her research on pediatric heart abnormalities. Brian, 34, had been made junior partner at his firm ahead of schedule. Each announcement was followed by approving nods and follow-up questions about their professional trajectories. When attention turned to me, my mother's question dripped with condescension. "And how is your little drawing hobby going, Allison? Are you still doing those logos for coffee shops?" Before I could defend my legitimate business, my father cleared his throat and shifted the conversation. "This brings us to the matter at hand. Catherine and I have built considerable assets over our lifetime. This house, the Cape Cod property, our investment portfolios, and various collections." He looked directly at Natalie and Brian. "We've always believed in rewarding hard work and responsible choices." The implication hung heavy in the air as he continued, "Natalie and Brian, you've both followed through on the opportunities we provided and built respectable careers. Our estate will be divided equally between you, with specific provisions for our grandchildren's education." My siblings nodded solemnly, though this couldn't have been surprising news. Then my father's gaze shifted to me, his expression a mixture of disappointment and what he probably thought was tough love. "Allison, after considerable discussion, your mother and I have decided that you will not receive an inheritance." Though I'd always known I was the family disappointment, hearing the words spoken so bluntly sent a physical shock through my system. The room suddenly seemed too bright, too warm, too small. "This isn't about punishment," my mother interjected, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We simply don't believe it would be helpful to your development. You chose to waste your potential on an unstable career path despite our guidance. Consider it tough love," my father added. "Perhaps this reality check will finally motivate you to grow up and reconsider your choices." I looked to my siblings, hoping for some sign of support or discomfort with this pronouncement. Natalie studied her manicure intently, while Brian offered a weak smile that might have been meant as sympathy but felt more like pity. Years of therapy had taught me something valuable. When faced with emotional ambush, breathe first. So I did. 3 deep breaths while I gathered my thoughts and dignity. "I understand," I said finally, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You've made your position clear, and it's your right to distribute your assets however you choose." My father looked momentarily taken aback by my composure, perhaps having expected tears or pleading. "This is for your own good, Allison. Someday you'll thank us." "Is there anything else we need to discuss?" I asked, already rising from the uncomfortable chair, eager to escape before my composure cracked. "That's all for today," my father confirmed, shuffling his papers with an air of finality. I nodded, murmured appropriate goodbyes, and walked out with my spine straight and head high. The real estate agent's smile I'd perfected over years of client meetings held until I reached my car. Only when I was safely inside with the doors locked did I allow the first sob to escape. Tears blurred the familiar landscape as I drove away from my childhood home, feeling both worthless and strangely liberated. The inheritance itself meant less to me than what it represented. My parents' unwavering belief that my life choices were invalid, my passion misguided, my entire existence a disappointment. In that moment, gripping the steering wheel as if it might anchor me to reality, I wondered if they were right. Had I been foolish to follow my heart? Was my life actually the failure they perceived it to be? The questions circled like vultures as I drove blindly toward the small apartment that suddenly felt like a testament to my inadequacy rather than my independence. For the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into work with a frenzy that bordered on self-destruction. I accepted every project that came my way, no matter how mundane or poorly compensated. My tiny apartment transformed into a chaotic workspace, with sketches covering every surface and empty coffee cups multiplying like rabbits. Sleep became an afterthought, food a mere necessity to keep my hand steady enough to draw. The painful scene in my father's study replayed in my mind during quiet moments, prompting me to blast music through headphones or talk to myself while working just to drown out the echoes. I avoided calls from friends, canceled my weekly movie night with my neighbor, and even skipped the local artists' meetup I'd been attending religiously for years. When Jessica, my closest friend since art school, finally showed up unannounced with takeout Thai food and a determined expression, I couldn't muster the energy to turn her away. "You look like hell," she announced, pushing past me to set down the food containers. The scent of pad thai momentarily broke through my haze of misery, reminding me I'd barely eaten that day. "Thanks for the update," I muttered, collapsing onto my worn sofa. "I've been busy." Jessica surveyed the apartment with the critical eye of someone who knew my normal level of creative chaos versus whatever this was. "This isn't busy, Allie. This is a breakdown in progress." Over spring rolls and coconut soup, I finally shared what had happened. Jessica listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from concern to outrage. "Your parents are unbelievable," she said when I finished. "Actually, no, they're totally believable because they've always been like this. But disinheriting you? That's next-level toxic." "Maybe they're right," I said, voicing the thought that had been poisoning my mind. "Maybe I have wasted my potential. I'm 32 and can barely make rents a month. Jessica pointed her chopsticks at me accusingly. That's your parents talking. You have regular clients who value your work. You've been published in design magazines. You were featured in that Boston Creative Spotlight last year. Just because you're not swimming in money doesn't mean you're a failure. When her rational arguments failed to penetrate my cloud of self-doubt, Jessica took a different approach. I think you should talk to someone professional about this. Your parents have been playing mind games with you your entire life, and it's not something you should navigate alone. The suggestion of therapy wasn't new. I'd gone briefly during college when the pressure and financial stress had triggered debilitating anxiety. But I'd stopped once I graduated, convinced I could handle things on my own. Looking at the state of my apartment and myself, I had to admit Jessica might have a point. The following Tuesday, I found myself in the warm, plant-filled office of Dr. Mendez, a therapist specializing in family dynamics who had a sliding scale payment option that wouldn't completely destroy my budget. Family expectations can shape our sense of self-worth in profound ways, she noted after I'd shared the basics of my situation. Especially when love and approval are tied to specific achievements or life paths. I've always known I was the black sheep, I admitted. But there's a difference between not being the favorite and being explicitly cut off. Over the next hour, Dr. Mendez helped me begin unpacking decades of conditional love and subtle undermining. We explored how my parents' definition of success had been presented as the only valid option, and how their disapproval had seeped into my self-perception despite my conscious rejection of their values. I left the session feeling raw but slightly lighter, with homework to journal about moments when I felt genuinely fulfilled by my creative work. The assignment felt like a lifeline, a way to reconnect with my authentic self beyond my parents' narrow judgment. 2 days later, as I was sketching preliminary designs for a local brewery's new label, my phone rang with my mother's ringtone. My stomach immediately clenched, but I answered, bracing for another critical conversation. Instead, her voice came through uncharacteristically fragile. Grandma Evelyn had a heart attack this morning. She didn't make it. The news hit like a physical blow. Grandma Evelyn, my champion, my secret ally, the one person in the family who saw and celebrated my authentic self, was gone. The sketch pad slipped from my lap as grief crashed over me in waves. The funeral is Saturday, my mother continued, her businesslike tone returning. We expect you to be there, appropriately dressed, by 10 a.m. The family will be meeting beforehand to coordinate. I managed to agree before ending the call, then curled into a ball on my sofa and wept until no more tears would come. Grandma Evelyn had been my lifeline in a family where I never quite fit, my connection to a different set of values than those my parents espoused. Without her, I felt truly alone in a way I never had before. The funeral was exactly as my grandmother would have hated, formal, stuffy, filled with social niceties and careful appearances. My mother had selected a traditional service at the Episcopal church my grandparents had attended primarily for social connections, though Grandma had often told me she found more spiritual fulfillment in her garden than in any church. I sat stiffly in the front pew between Brian and a second cousin, wearing the only black dress I owned, which my mother had eyed disapprovingly as casual. Around me, family members dabbed at dry eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs, while the minister spoke of a woman he clearly barely knew. At the reception afterward, held at my parents' house, I moved through rooms like a ghost, accepting condolences from people who seemed more interested in networking with my father than mourning my grandmother. When I overheard two of my mother's friends discussing the substantial Montgomery estate in speculative tones, I slipped away to find a moment of peace. Almost instinctively, I found myself in what had been my grandmother's sitting room when she lived with my parents during her final years. The space had already been partially dismantled, her collection of art books boxed up, the colorful throw pillows she loved replaced with my mother's preferred neutral tones. But on the small writing desk in the corner, a framed sketch still stood, a drawing I'd made of her garden when I was 16, which she had insisted on framing, because I want to remember how you see the world. Seeing that small piece of myself still honored in her space broke something open inside me. I carefully took the frame from the desk, certain my mother would discard it once she noticed, and slipped it into my bag to preserve this last connection to the woman who had truly seen me. That night, alone in my apartment, I stared at the sketch and wondered if I had made a terrible mistake with my life choices. Without Grandma Evelyn's quiet support and perspective, doubt crept in like fog. Maybe artistic fulfillment was a luxury I couldn't afford. Maybe security should have mattered more than passion. Maybe my parents' practical wisdom had been right out. 3 weeks after the funeral, life had settled into a new normal: therapy on Tuesdays, work during the day, and evenings spent either staring blankly at streaming shows or making half-hearted attempts at personal art projects that no longer brought the joy they once had. The fog of grief hung over everything, making colors seem less vibrant and inspiration more distant. I was in the middle of a client call, discussing website design revisions for a local bakery, when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, finished my call with promises of updated mock-ups by Friday, and then played the message while absently stirring a cup of rapidly cooling coffee. "Hello, Miss Prescott. This is Lawrence Bennett from Bennett and Associates Law Firm. I was your grandmother Evelyn Montgomery Prescott's personal attorney. It's important that we speak regarding her estate at your earliest convenience. Please call me back at this number." My coffee mug froze midway to my lips. Grandmother had a personal attorney? Separate from the family lawyer who had handled the funeral arrangements? This was the first I'd heard of it. Curiosity propelled me to return the call immediately. Mr. Bennett's receptionist put me through after confirming my identity, and a warm, slightly gravelly voice greeted me. "Miss Prescott, thank you for returning my call so promptly. I've been attempting to reach you since shortly after your grandmother's passing, but the contact information I had was outdated." "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett, but I'm a bit confused," I admitted. "I wasn't aware my grandmother had separate legal representation. My parents handled everything after she passed." "Ah," he said, and that single syllable contained volumes of understanding. "Your grandmother was quite private about certain matters. Would you be available to meet in person? There are documents that require your signature, and frankly, some things are better discussed face to face." We arranged to meet the following morning at his office in downtown Boston. That night, sleep eluded me as questions multiplied. What could Grandma Evelyn have kept so private that she needed a separate lawyer? Was there family drama I didn't know about? Perhaps a small bequest she wanted to ensure I received despite my parents' objections? The next morning, I found myself in a surprisingly modest office in a historic building near the Common. Bennett and Associates occupied the entire third floor, but lacked the marble and mahogany intimidation tactics of my mother's firm. Lawrence Bennett himself was an avuncular man in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a bookshelf filled with what appeared to be first editions. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he began after we'd settled into comfortable chairs with cups of tea. "We worked together for over 40 years, and I considered her a friend as well as a client." 40 years. I echoed, surprised. "That's longer than I've been alive." Bennett nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "Evelyn came to me when she decided to establish her independence, financially speaking. You see, when she married your grandfather, her family was less than supportive. She told me they thought she was marrying beneath her station," I offered. "Indeed. What she may not have mentioned is that they attempted to control her through financial means. Her trust fund came with significant strings attached, which she found increasingly restrictive. So, with your grandfather's support, she began building her own resources, separate from both her family money and your grandfather's earnings." He opened a folder on his desk and adjusted his glasses. "Which brings us to the matter at hand. Your grandmother left very specific instructions in her will, which was updated just last year. Evelyn Montgomery Prescott left her entire estate to you, Allison Marie Prescott, without condition or restriction." The words didn't immediately register. "I'm sorry, what do you mean by her entire estate?" Bennett's expression was gentle. "Your grandmother owned a brownstone in Beacon Hill, purchased in the 1970s through a separate LLC. She also maintained an investment portfolio, managed independently from the family accounts, and a collection of art and antiques. The total value at current market appraisal is approximately $2 million. The room seemed to tilt slightly. $2 million, that can't be right. My grandmother lived with my parents. She didn't own property. She moved in with your parents 5 years ago when her arthritis made it difficult to navigate the brownstone stairs, but she retained ownership. She rented it out for a period, then left it vacant these past 2 years. She was quite strategic about keeping certain aspects of her life private, especially from your parents. My mind raced back through conversations with Grandma, searching for clues I might have missed. There had been comments about having put something aside for me, about understanding financial independence, about having tricks up her sleeve, but I'd never imagined anything of this magnitude. "There's more," Bennett continued, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. "Your grandmother left this letter for you. She asked that you read it privately, but I can answer any questions that arise afterward." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in my grandmother's elegant handwriting. "My dearest Allison, asterisk. If you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever adventure comes next. Don't waste too many tears on me. I've had a full life with more joy than sorrow, which is all anyone can ask for, asterisk. You're probably in shock right now, learning about what Lawrence calls my shadow life. I never meant to deceive you, but privacy became a habit over the decades, especially regarding finances. Your mother and father have very specific ideas about money, success, and appropriate behavior, ideas I found suffocating even before you were born, asterisk. The truth is simple. I recognize myself in you from the moment you first picked up a crayon. The same fire, the same vision, the same refusal to be confined by others' expectations. I watched your parents try to extinguish that flame the same way mine tried with me, and I made a promise to myself that I would ensure you had the freedom to follow your path, asterisk. What Lawrence hasn't told you yet is the source of my fortune. The brownstone was purchased with proceeds from my artwork. Yes, your supposedly proper Boston grandmother had a secret career as an illustrator under the name Yem Gray. Those mysterious committee meetings I attended during your childhood? Gallery showings and client meetings. The volunteering I did 3 days a week? Studio time, asterisk. Your grandfather was my co-conspirator in this deception, bless him. He believed in me when no one else did, built me a studio in the brownstone's top floor, and ran interference with family when needed. The Montgomery fire I always told you about isn't just passion or creativity, it's the courage to live authentically, whatever the cost, asterisk. I've watched you struggle, both financially and emotionally, as you've built your creative life. I've wanted to help so many times, but I knew offering too soon might rob you of the strength that comes from finding your own way. But now, my darling girl, you've proven your determination and talent. This inheritance isn't a rescue, it's a recognition of what you've already accomplished and a tool for what you've yet to create, asterisk. The brownstone key is with Lawrence. The top floor studio is waiting for you. In the locked cabinet behind the bookshelf, you'll find my complete portfolio, including pieces created under my real name that have never been shown publicly. Do with them what you will. They're yours now, along with everything else, asterisk. Remember this. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to live as your authentic self. Your parents may never understand this, and that's their loss. Don't let their limited vision diminish your expansive one, asterisk. With all my love and complete faith in you, asterisk. Grandma Evelyn, asterisk. Also known as E.M. Gray, asterisk. Tears blurred the words as I reached the end. My grandmother, proper, pearls-wearing, society matron Evelyn Montgomery Prescott, had led a double life as an artist. She had understood my passion because she had lived it herself, hidden from judging eyes and narrow expectations. Yem Gray, I whispered, looking up at Bennett. I know that name. There was a retrospective of her work at the MFA 5 years ago. I went to it and was blown away by her technical skill and vision. That was my grandmother. Bennett nodded, his expression softening. She was quite accomplished, though she kept her identity closely guarded. The art world knew her only through carefully managed communications and rare appearances always scheduled when your parents were traveling. Before I could process this revelation fully, My phone began buzzing insistently. My mother's name flashed on the screen. "I should take this," I said apologetically. "Allison." My mother's voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "We've just received notice from some ambulance-chasing lawyer claiming Grandma left you everything. This is obviously a mistake or a manipulation." Your father is livid. The old Allison would have apologized, explained, tried to smooth ruffled feathers. But sitting in Bennett's office with my grandmother's letter in my hand, something shifted fundamentally inside me. "It's not a mistake, Mom. I'm with Grandma's attorney now. We can discuss this later when you're calmer." "Do not hang up on me," she hissed. "We're meeting with Walter this afternoon." Walter Hoffman was the family's longtime attorney. "You will be there at 3 p.m. to sort out this misunderstanding." The command in her voice was so familiar, so expected, that I nearly agreed automatically. Instead, I took a breath and found my voice. "I'll be there with Mr. Bennett." "Goodbye, Mom." As I ended the call, I felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. For perhaps the first time in my life, I had directly opposed my mother's will without backing down or apologizing. The ground beneath me had shifted, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. ## Part 6. Family Confrontation and Escalation. Walter Hoffman's law office embodied old money Boston, with its dark paneling, oil paintings of stern-faced partners past, and furniture that valued tradition over comfort. I arrived with Mr. Bennett precisely at 3, finding my parents and siblings already seated in the conference room, an united front of disapproval. My father's face was flushed with anger, my mother's frozen in the Arctic calm that signaled her most dangerous mood. Brian looked uncomfortable but resolute in his loyalty to our parents, while Natalie's expression held a complexity I couldn't quite read. "Allison," Walter Hoffman greeted me with professional neutrality, "and Mr. Bennett, I presume? Thank you for joining us on such short notice." "Lawrence, please," my grandmother's attorney replied easily, seemingly unfazed by the tension crackling through the room. "Evelyn spoke highly of you, Walter." "This situation is highly irregular," my father interrupted, his surgeon's precision giving way to barely controlled emotion. "My mother would never have excluded the rest of the family from her estate, especially to favor someone who had the least interaction with her in recent years." The accusation stung, but I knew it wasn't true. While I hadn't lived with my grandmother as my parents had in her final years, our connection had remained strong through calls, letters, and visits carefully scheduled when my parents were out. "Dr. Prescott," Bennett responded calmly, "I understand this comes as a shock, but I assure you that Evelyn was of completely sound mind when she updated her will last year. She was explicit about her wishes, and the document meets all legal requirements." My mother leaned forward, pearl necklace swinging like a pendulum. "Mr. Bennett, my husband and I cared for Evelyn in our home for 5 years. We managed her medical care, her daily needs, everything. Meanwhile, Allison visited occasionally at best. It's absurd to suggest that this distribution reflects my mother-in-law's actual intentions." "Perhaps," Bennett suggested mildly, "Evelyn had her reasons, which she felt no obligation to explain to everyone present." "This is clearly manipulation," my father insisted, turning his gaze to me. "Allison, what did you say to her? What promises did you make? You know she was always soft on you." The accusation sent a flush of anger through me. I didn't manipulate Grandma. I didn't even know about any of this until today. Hoffman cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the will Mr. Bennett provided, and I must inform you that it appears legally sound. Mrs. Prescott had independent medical evaluation confirming her cognitive capacity when it was signed and witnessed. While you could contest it, I don't believe you would have strong grounds." My mother's expression hardened. "Walter, you can't possibly be suggesting we allow this to stand. There must be options." While the attorneys discussed legal technicalities, Brian leaned toward me. "What were you thinking, Allie? You know this will destroy your relationship with Mom and Dad." "I didn't do anything," I whispered back. "This was Grandma's decision." "You could decline the inheritance," he suggested. "Keep the peace." Before I could respond, Bennett's voice cut through the tension. There's another matter that might clarify Evelyn's intentions. The brownstone contains significant personal property, including a collection of artwork created by Yem Gray. My father frowned. Who? Yem Gray was a noted illustrator and artist from the 1960s through the early 2000s, Bennett explained. Her work has been exhibited at the Museum of Fine Arts and is held in several private collections. What does this have to do with my mother? My father demanded. Bennett looked to me, silently offering the choice to reveal or withhold this information. Drawing strength from my grandmother's letter, I spoke clearly. Yem Gray was Grandma's professional name. She was an artist her entire adult life, in secret. The stunned silence that followed was almost worth the tension of the meeting. My father's mouth actually dropped open, while my mother's eyes narrowed in disbelief. That's absurd, she finally said. Evelyn was a society matron. She served on charity committees and garden clubs. And painted, I added, professionally and successfully. The brownstone was purchased with earnings from her artwork, not family money. This is preposterous, my father sputtered. My mother was not some bohemian artist hiding away with paints and canvases. Bennett removed a folder from his briefcase and slid several glossy exhibition catalogs across the table. Yem Gray's retrospective at the MFA 5 years ago. If you look carefully at the foreword, you'll note that the curator mentions the artist's insistence on privacy and limited public appearances. As my parents flipped through the catalogs with increasing agitation, Natalie caught my eye with a look of what might have been respect. So Grandma had a secret life too, she murmured, almost to herself. My mother closed the catalog with a sharp snap. Even if this fantastical story is true, it doesn't change the fact that this distribution is unconscionable. Evelyn was clearly not thinking clearly toward the end. The evidence suggests otherwise, Bennett replied calmly. We'll contest it, my father declared. Undue influence, diminished capacity, whatever it takes. Hoffman shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Prescott, as I mentioned, the documentation is quite thorough. Pursuing litigation would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. The meeting deteriorated from there, with my parents growing increasingly hostile. By the end, my father issued what amounted to an ultimatum. Allison, if you pursue this, if you accept this manipulation of your grandmother's intentions, you're making a choice about your place in this family. The threat hung in the air as we departed, my parents sweeping out without saying goodbye, Brian following after a conflicted glance in my direction. Only Natalie lingered, catching my arm as I prepared to leave. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm not surprised Grandma did this. She always said you were the one who truly saw her. Her words were a small comfort as I left the imposing building with Bennett, my future with my family hanging by an increasingly frayed thread. The following days brought escalating pressure. Family friends called with concerns about my grandmother's mental state in her final years. Distant relatives sent pointed messages about family loyalty. My mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, showed up at my apartment unannounced to talk sense into me, armed with childhood photos and guilt tactics. Most painfully, my father employed emotional manipulation with surgical precision. Your acceptance of this situation will break your mother's heart, he told me during a call that came during a client meeting, forcing me to step away from work. After everything we've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us? The irony of his claim about sacrifices wasn't lost on me, but the pressure took its toll nonetheless. Each night, I'd lie awake questioning myself, wondering if accepting my grandmother's gift was worth the cost to family relationships, strained as they already were. The situation reached its peak when I finally visited the brownstone on Beacon Hill, using the key Bennett had provided. The elegant four-story building with its classic facade had been well maintained, with certain areas recently renovated. As I moved through rooms filled with tasteful furniture, artwork, and books, I felt my grandmother's presence in every carefully chosen item. When I reached the top-floor studio, I understood everything. The space was flooded with natural light from skylights, walls lined with canvases and illustrations in various stages of completion. An easel stood by the window, a half-finished landscape still clipped to it, brushes cleaned and waiting in their holder as if my grandmother had just stepped away for a moment. The locked cabinet Bennett had mentioned yielded a treasure trove, portfolios of completed works, sketchbooks dating back decades, and journals documenting my grandmother's thoughts on art, family, and the complexity of her double life. In one journal from 1997, I found an entry that pierced my heart. Watched little Allison drawing in the garden today. Thomas and Catherine were discussing private schools and future medical specialties, while their 8-year-old created the most extraordinary fairies among the roses. They didn't notice her work, but I did. I see myself in her, the same wonder, the same vision. I worry they'll do to her what my parents tried to do to me, crush that spark in favor of practicality and status. Harold says I should speak up, but would they listen? Instead, I'll be her secret ally, her fellow conspirator in beauty. Someday, when she's ready, I'll show her my studio and tell her everything. Until then, I'll protect her spirit however I can. Asterisk. Tears streamed down my face as decades of my grandmother's quiet support came into focus. She had been fighting for me all along, in her own careful way, When my phone rang with my father's ringtone, I answered with a new resolve. "We need to settle this matter once and for all," he said without preamble. "Your mother and I have discussed it, and we're prepared to be generous despite your behavior. We'll provide you with a reasonable sum, say $50,000, and in return, you'll sign over the brownstone and remaining assets to be distributed properly among the family." "No," I said simply. His sharp intake of breath signaled surprise at my directness. "Excuse me?" I said no. I'm not signing over Grandma's estate. This was her decision, her legacy to me, and I'm honoring it. "Then you leave us no choice," he said, voice hardening. "If you persist in this selfishness, in this betrayal of family, you're choosing to separate yourself from us completely. No holidays, no family events, no relationship. Is that really what you want?" Standing in my grandmother's studio, surrounded by evidence of her secret passion and quiet resistance, I found clarity. What I want is a family who loves me unconditionally, who respects my choices even when they differ from yours. If you can't offer that, then yes, I'm choosing to honor Grandma's legacy over your conditions. The silence that followed stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, his voice came through, cold and formal. "I see. Goodbye, Allison." As the call ended, I sank onto my grandmother's painting stool, overwhelmed by what had just happened. I had effectively been disowned by my parents, cast out for refusing to reject my grandmother's gift. The finality of it struck like a physical blow, leaving me breathless with grief and uncertainty. Part 7, Rock Bottom and Decision Point. In the days following my father's ultimatum, I spiraled into a state of anxiety that made functioning nearly impossible. I missed deadlines, canceled meetings, and spent hours staring blankly at my apartment walls. The weight of family rejection, even from a family as complicated as mine, pressed down like a physical force. One morning, I woke gasping from a nightmare about being locked out of my childhood home, pounding on doors while my family watched impassively through windows. My heart raced so violently I feared it might burst from my chest, my vision tunneling as I struggled to breathe. When the panic attack finally subsided, I called Dr. Mendez and scheduled an emergency session. Her calm presence anchored me as I poured out everything: the inheritance, my grandmother's secret life, my parents' rejection. "Family estrangement is its own kind of grief," she noted after listening attentively. "Even when the relationship was difficult, the finality of that break can be traumatic." "I keep wondering if I'm making a mistake," I admitted. $2 million is life-changing, but is it worth losing my family? Dr. Mendez considered this carefully. "Perhaps we're framing this incorrectly. The question isn't whether money is worth more than family, but whether your autonomy and self-respect are worth more than conditional acceptance." Her reframing struck a chord. "They've always offered love with conditions attached. And your grandmother offered you a gift with no strings attached," she pointed out. "That's a profound statement about how she valued you." We spent the remainder of the session exploring the difference between genuine family support and the performance of family obligation. I left with homework that seemed simultaneously simple and impossibly difficult: visit the brownstone again, and try to connect with what my grandmother wanted for me, rather than what my parents demanded. The following day, I returned to Beacon Hill with overnight bag in hand, determined to spend real time in the space my grandmother had created. I walked through each room slowly, touching furniture, examining photographs, opening books to find her notes and margins. In the kitchen, I found her recipe box with cards in her elegant handwriting, including my childhood favorite cookies marked for Allison's visits. In the master bedroom, family photos lined the dresser, including several of me at art shows and school exhibitions that I hadn't known she'd attended. In the closet, her clothes still hung neatly, the scent of her lavender perfume lingering faintly. I sat on her bed and allowed myself to cry, mourning her loss all over again, but this time with a deeper understanding of who she had truly been. As evening fell, I finally returned to the studio, turning on lamps to illuminate the space. A worn leather journal caught my eye, newer than the others I'd found, resting on a small writing desk. Opening it, I realized it contained entries from just the past few years, including my grandmother's thoughts after moving in with my parents. Living under Thomas and Catherine's roof is a special kind of purgatory. One entry read. Every day I must pretend to be the mother and grandmother they expect, proper, conventional, satisfied with bridge games and garden club meetings. My hands ache for my brushes, my mind for the freedom of my studio. I've taken to sketching in the bathroom with the door locked, like a teenager with contraband. The indignity would be laughable if it weren't so painful. Further entries detailed her strategic planning, renting the brownstone temporarily to maintain appearances while preserving it for me, gradually liquidating certain investments to ensure they wouldn't be visible in any estate planning my parents might investigate, maintaining her relationship with Bennett despite my parents' insistence that Walter handle everything. The most recent entry, dated just 2 months before her death, hit me hardest. Saw Allison yesterday when Thomas and Catherine were at the symphony. She doesn't know how much I see, the weariness around her eyes, the way she dims her light around her parents. They've done such damage with their conditional love, making her question her worth because she chose authenticity over their narrow definition of success. I was too cautious in my own rebellion, hiding Gray away like a shameful secret. I don't want that half-life for her. The brownstone, the money, these are just tools. What I really want to give her is permission to live boldly, to create without apology, to define success on her own terms. I've lived 2 lives, Evelyn Prescott for the family and Gray for myself. Allison deserves one integrated life, lived authentically and joyfully. If my respectable children disown her for accepting what's rightfully hers, perhaps that's the final gift I can offer, freedom from the golden cage of conditional love that has trapped generations of our family. My grandmother's words pierced through the fog of doubt and fear that had surrounded me since my father's ultimatum. She had understood exactly what would happen, had anticipated my parents' reaction, and had still chosen this path, not to cause pain, but to offer liberation. I slept that night in my grandmother's bed, surrounded by her belongings, and woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. After a breakfast of toast and tea at her kitchen table, I called my parents and requested a final meeting. They agreed, setting a time that afternoon at their home. I arrived to find them in the formal living room rather than my father's study, a public space for what they likely anticipated would be my capitulation. My mother spoke first, her voice carefully modulated to project both authority and maternal concern. "We're glad you've come to your senses, Allison. Walter has prepared the paperwork for transferring the brownstone and other assets. Once signed, we can put this unfortunate episode behind us." I looked between them, my father imperious in his armchair, my mother poised on the edge of the sofa, and saw them clearly perhaps for the first time. They weren't monsters or villains, they were products of their own upbringing and limitations, unable to see beyond the narrow path they defined as successful. "I haven't come to sign anything," I said quietly. "I wanted to tell you in person that I'm accepting Grandma's inheritance, completely and without reservation." My father's face flushed. "Then why are you here? To gloat?" "No. I'm here because despite everything, you're my parents, and I owed you the respect of saying this directly. I love you, but I won't allow you to control me through conditional acceptance anymore. My mother's perfect posture stiffened further. So you choose money over family. How disappointing but not surprising. That's not what this is about, I countered, maintaining my calm. This is about respecting Grandma's wishes and claiming the life she wanted for me, one where I define my own success instead of constantly trying to earn your approval. And what exactly do you plan to do with this windfall? My father asked derisively. Continue your little drawing career? For the first time in my life, his dismissal didn't wound me. Yes. I'm going to continue my successful design business, which has supported me independently for years. I'm going to use the brownstone as both home and studio, just as Grandma did. And I'm going to honor her legacy by living authentically rather than hiding parts of myself to please others. Then we have nothing more to discuss, my mother said, rising. You've made your choice, Allison. Don't expect to be welcomed back when this artistic phase finally runs its course. The finality in her voice would have devastated me weeks earlier. Now, it simply confirmed what I already knew. Their love had always been conditional, based on compliance rather than acceptance. I hope someday you'll reconsider, I said, standing to leave. My door will remain open if you ever want a relationship based on mutual respect rather than control. As I walked out of my childhood home, I felt a complex mixture of grief and liberation. The pain of rejection was real, but underneath it lay something unexpected, a sense of solidity in my own identity that no external validation or rejection could shake. In my grandmother's final journal entry, she had written, "The Montgomery fire isn't just passion or talent. It's the courage to stand in your truth even when the world tries to extinguish it." Walking to my car with head high and spine straight, I felt that fire burning steady and clear, no longer in danger of being smothered by others' expectations. Part 8. Transformation and New Beginning. 6 months can change everything. As spring blossomed into summer and then mellowed into fall, the brownstone on Beacon Hill transformed from my grandmother's preserved shrine into my living, breathing home. The formal dining room became a client meeting space, brightened with colorful cushions and contemporary art. The stuffy sitting room opened up with rearranged furniture and newly uncovered windows. The kitchen, once pristine and rarely used, now regularly filled with the sense of my amateur cooking attempts and laughter from friends gathered around the island. Most significantly, the top-floor studio evolved from my grandmother's sacred space to our shared creative hub. I kept her easel by the window but added my own drafting table and computer setup. Her brushes remained in their holder beside my stylus and tablet. Some days, working surrounded by both our tools felt like a conversation across time, two women who chose creativity despite the costs. The financial security my grandmother provided allowed me to transform my business approach entirely. I established Prescott Design as a proper studio, hired a part-time assistant, and began turning down projects that didn't align with my creative vision. To my surprise, this selectivity actually attracted more interesting clients, restaurants wanting complete brand identities, local museums seeking exhibition graphics, even a small publisher contracting me for book cover designs. "You move differently now," Jessica observed over coffee in my kitchen one Saturday morning. "Like you're not constantly bracing for impact." "Therapy helps," I admitted. "But so does not having to take every job that comes along just to make rent." I never realized how much creative energy was consumed by financial anxiety. The inheritance brought unexpected challenges, too. Friends from art school sometimes made awkward jokes about my rich girl status, not understanding that my grandmother's gift represented freedom rather than frivolity. Distant relatives emerged with sudden interest in connection and loans. Learning to navigate these new dynamics required developing boundaries I'd never needed before. Dr. Mendez helped me work through the complex emotions surrounding my family estrangement. "Grief doesn't follow a linear path," she reminded me during our now monthly sessions. "You can be thriving in your new life and still feel the loss of family connection." The loss remained painful, particularly around holidays and family milestones. When Brian's wife had their second child, I learned about my new nephew through social media rather than a phone call. Christmas approached with no invitation to the traditional family gathering. These absences created hollow spaces that success and financial security couldn't fill. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday in October, a text message arrived from an unexpected source. Natalie. In town for a conference. Coffee possible? Just us. We met at a quiet cafe near Massachusetts General, where she was presenting research. The initial awkwardness gave way to cautious conversation, then surprising candor. Mom and Dad refused to discuss you, she admitted, stirring her latte absently. It's like you've been erased, except for occasional references to your betrayal. I figured as much, I said, trying to ignore the sting. How are you handling the family drama? Natalie's smile held unexpected warmth. Honestly, watching you stand your ground made me question some things about my own choices. I've always followed the prescribed path without questioning: med school, cardiology, research, publishing. I'm good at it, but sometimes I wonder if I chose it or if it chose me. Our conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, weaving through childhood memories, current lives, and the complicated legacy of our family's dynamics. Before parting, Natalie asked to see the brownstone, curious about our grandmother's secret studio and the life she'd hidden from the family. Standing in the light-filled space, surrounded by our grandmother's artwork, Natalie whispered, "She was extraordinary." How did none of us know? The family saw what they expected to see, I suggested. The proper Boston matron, not the artist with paint under her fingernails. Like they see what they expect with you, Natalie observed. The disappointing daughter rather than the successful designer. That first meeting led to regular calls and occasional visits, a tentative rebuilding of sisterhood outside our parents' influence. Brian remained distant, firmly in our father's camp, but Natalie's reconnection offered hope that family bonds might be renegotiated rather than severed completely. Meanwhile, I pursued a project that had been forming in my mind since discovering my grandmother's secret career. With Bennett's help, I connected with curators and galleries that had previously shown E.M. Gray's work, organizing a retrospective exhibition titled Evelyn Montgomery Gray, the Unveiled Artist. The opening night gallery event brought together Boston's art community, former colleagues and clients of my grandmother's who had known only her professional persona, and a handful of family friends brave enough to defy my parents' tacit boycott. Natalie came, standing proudly beside me as we welcomed guests to the celebration of our grandmother's dual legacy. Most meaningful was the arrival of Lawrence Bennett, now more friend than attorney, who brought a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Your grandmother asked me to give you this, if the exhibition ever happened," he explained. "She prepared it years ago, adding notes periodically, always believing you would someday bring her worlds together." Inside was a leather-bound sketchbook filled with drawings, my grandmother's illustrations of me throughout my childhood and early adulthood. Me concentrating on a drawing at age 7, teenaged me sketching in the garden, college-aged me presenting a project, adult me in my first tiny studio apartment. Alongside each image were her observations, hopes, and unwavering belief in my creative path. On the final page, in shaky handwriting that suggested it had been added during her final months, she had written, "The greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the courage to live authentically." You already possessed this wealth long before you knew about the brownstone. Remember that on difficult days. Standing in the gallery, surrounded by my grandmother's artwork and the community that had formed around me, I understood the true nature of her gift. The money and property provided security, certainly, but the real inheritance was the permission to define success on my own terms, to create without apology, and to recognize that conditional love isn't really love at all. The family I had now, friends who showed up consistently, colleagues who respected my vision, Natalie cautiously finding her own path to authenticity, the memory of my grandmother's unwavering support, might look different from conventional expectations, but it was no less valid or valuable. As I moved through the exhibition, introducing guests to my grandmother's work and sharing stories of her secret creative life, I felt a profound sense of integration. The disparate pieces of my identity, the proper Boston upbringing, the artistic rebellion, the The financial insecurity followed by unexpected inheritance had cohered into something whole and authentic. Dr. Mendez had asked me once what success would look like in my new life. At the time, I'd given practical answers about financial stability and creative freedom. Now I understood that true success was this feeling of inhabiting my life fully, without apology or performance, honoring both my grandmother's legacy and my own vision. The path forward would continue to hold challenges. Family estrangement left wounds that might never fully heal. The art world and business landscape would bring new obstacles to navigate. But standing amid the physical proof of my grandmother's secret rebellion and enduring creativity, I knew I possessed the inheritance that mattered most, the courage to live authentically, whatever that might cost or create. If you've ever had to choose between family expectations and your authentic self, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. This journey has taught me that while inheritance can be measured in dollars, the most valuable legacies are measured in courage, authenticity, and unconditional love. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need permission to follow their own path. Remember, sometimes the greatest gift we receive is the courage to be truly ourselves.